Starting.
Mine says we're
live. Yay. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to First Impressions, the podcast where we talk about Jane Austen and our love for her and give a big middle finger to all the haters. And this is a very special episode because we're circling back to the very beginning of this podcast and we're returning to Pride and Prejudice.
Woohoo!
And we were just talking about the fact that we're both very nervous to do this podcast because Pride and Prejudice has been covered by other podcasts very well. And even though we've talked a lot about how to organize this and the things we want to say, it's such a sprawling, there's so much to say. So I'm sure we'll do our typical thing where we started talking about one thing and then going on a total tangent, but that seems to work for us. I have to say, people still listen to us even though we do that. So Pride and Prejudice. And so Maggie, I think you will agree, we do not have to do a plot synopsis for our listeners.
Kristen, you ruined my joke.
Oh no.
I was going to do this whole thing where I said, okay, everyone, I'm going to give you a plot synopsis. Just in case you don't know what Pride and Prejudice is about, there's a girl, Lizzie Bennet, and she's great. And then I was going to be like, you guys all know this story.
Yeah.
Honestly, if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't seen anything Pride and Prejudice, maybe not the 6-hour miniseries, but maybe the movie version or read the book, then, I mean, that's great. If you're still listening to us, but come on, you guys all know the story.
Yeah, go do your like I don't think we have any haters listening to this podcast, but if we do, welcome. Go watch the miniseries and then come back. And the miniseries, informed the first two podcasts. I mean, in the first episode, you were like, "We're going to be talking about the text, right?" And I was like, "Yeah," and then we totally did that because the movie was so seminal and what I wanted to really dig into. Now
I'm sure most people who are fans of the book and fans of the miniseries, when you reread the book, much like us, one of your first thoughts will probably be, that was a really faithful adaptation.
Yes, and so many of the lines are taken directly. And, I think I read an interview with Davies where he was like, yeah, if I went back and did that, I wouldn't have done that. I was just too afraid to deviate from the source material. And I'm thinking, no, Davies.
Why? Yeah.
Why deviate from Austen? Yeah. And he was so faithful, and that's why it's so good. But when you go back and read the book, it acts as an unfortunate filter so that when you're reading the book and you read the lines, you hear the delivery of the actors in the movie, and it's already been interpreted for you. And one of the struggles I had with this first reread is that I was getting bogged down in that and not reading the text, and I was trying to go back and reread paragraphs and absorb them as I would have were I just reading the book for the first time.
Yeah. I know it is very difficult for people when there is such a kind of seminal example of a film or a miniseries where in their head they see the characters as that actor. This is also very common, I think, with Harry Potter books, where, Snape will always be Alan Rickman, or I always see Emma Watson or something like that. And for this, I actually don't see a lot of the actors when I'm reading it in my head. There are some exceptions. And sometimes I will even think, in my head, this person, like reading a particular passage, I will even think to myself, in the movie, in the show, it's like this, but in my head, I'm seeing it differently. And I acknowledge that. But I do have some very different visuals and, kind of hearing the voices in my head from the miniseries. But I think we should do a whole separate episode where we discuss kind of the book and the miniseries. What do you think?
Yeah, and their relationship together. So I'll try not to get into that.
Well, that's going to happen. That's just going to happen naturally, though, I'm sure.
One of the things I have to say about the Harry Potter and the adaptations, though, is I read the book. Obviously, a lot of us read the books before we saw the movies, and then you get mad because you're like, that's not what that character's supposed to look like, or how they're supposed to sound, or how they're supposed to deliver that line. And I always imagined Lupin as really hot. For some reason.
Of all the characters that I thought you were going to say...
I did. I was imagining.
Even like the number one word she uses to describe him is probably shabby.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I don't know. He's an intellectual. I'm always attracted to that.
That's so funny. Also, I think it's really hilarious. I mean, not to hold myself up as like I'm so much more mature than everyone else, but I just think it's so weird when people get angry.
Oh, yeah.
When a movie interpretation differs from their 100% subjective view. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like, you can have the author describe a character, and with Austen, there's very little physical descriptions. And so, but in Harry Potter, there are more. But when someone is like, that looks nothing like I pictured, I'm enraged. How can you be angry? It's in your own brain. Movie producers and directors and casting agents don't have a one-way view into your particular head.
But that's how you fell in love with the characters. That's how it's ripping away your reality and the people you think you know. Like, what if you were reincarnated, Maggie, as a totally different woman with totally different mannerisms, a totally different look, and I would be like, you're not Maggie.
Okay, but let me just tell you, having a different actor on screen for people to enjoy does not take away my enjoyment of the character in my head.
And it shouldn't. I
just don't. I mean, I guess I understand on an intellectual level what you're saying about like how people get angry and feel betrayed and stuff like that. But in a realistic, real world view, I just don't get it. Like, you're crazy. Now I'm gonna get hate mail.
Well, that could have happened with me.
Like enjoying a movie. And the Harry Potter movies, you know, are very different from the books in a lot of ways. My love of the movies does not take away any part of my love for the books. And they're different. It's different form of storytelling.
It is. And that has turned out to be true, you know, even from the beginning for me and with Pride and Prejudice. You know, who cannot love this book? I have a quote. So I read the pocket book edition of Pride and Prejudice. It was issued in 1940 something. It coincided with the release of the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer inspiring motion picture.
Oh, you know how I feel about that one. We talked about this on our last episode.
Yeah, with Laurence Olivier. And actually, Margaret's mom gave this to me. She found it at like a thrift store or something. And she's like, oh my God, it's so fun. It's so old. It's great to read. But it has a quote from William Lyon Phelps, who I don't know who that is, but on the cover,
he sounds like an old white dude.
He does, and it says one of the few great novels of the world. And hey, I don't think anyone could really argue with that.
I agree. This is definitely her most famous and most beloved work.
I have to say that it also has a quote on the back, which inspired my rereading of this, or I kept in mind, you know, without really intending to, but just because I had just read it. The quote on the back says, Jane Austen, quote, describes men and women exactly as they are, one critic said, and tells her tale of ordinary life with such truthful delineation, such bewildering simplicity, and moreover with such a purity of style and language as have rarely been equaled and perhaps never surpassed. And
is that supposed to be a compliment?
Yeah, and all the characters are drawn with the humor, delicacy, and intimate knowledge of men and women, which are always found in Jane Austen. And so, yeah, every passage I was reading, I was like, yes, simplicity, purity, it's the intimacy, it's the delicacy, knowledge of men and women. And I kept seeing it over and over again, which is, you know, we always talk about that anyway. But
I disagree. I disagree, though, with the saying that, I mean, one of the big themes on our podcast is how Austen is so masterful at writing characters that seem as if they were real people. But I disagree with it, especially Pride and Prejudice, with it being like everyday situations. Because, I mean, think of the things that happen. Like a girl from a family of very little consequence ends up marrying like one of the richest men in England. It's not a fairy tale story, but that's not like by the common way.
That's true. But in the very beginning of the book, though, and this is one of the things we were going to talk about, is the depiction of country life and all the little bitchiness and all the little gossips and all the little rhythms of daily life are very well portrayed. So I would agree that the entire storyline is not necessarily an everyday kind of storyline, but should just keep away from the passions and murders and you know, that kind of thing.
But that's why you get invested, because you spend time at the beginning establishing these characters as living in a very real world similar to your own, you know, if you were alive at that time. But you establish these characters living in a world similar to your own. It could be your world. And then when they do go off and have these experiences, it is more believable and you are more emotionally invested as a result. It's a lot like Lord of the Rings. Like sorry to go off on another fantasy tangent, but if we don't spend a lot of time in the Shire in the beginning to appreciate the life that the hobbits lead, the type of people that the hobbits are, it loses so much emotional impact as we follow Bilbo through his adventures and to see how he's changed upon the arrival home if we don't understand what his life was like before.
I completely agree with that. And I think the way it's so well done in Pride and Prejudice is that it really surprised me to realize this. But when you do read the beginning for the first 3 chapters, the main characters and the people with the principal amount of dialogue are Mr. and Mrs. Bennet.
Yes.
And you think you're starting out as an author with this amazing character, Lizzie Bennet, and she's so funny and she's so witty, and you're gonna introduce her right away. But by holding back, I mean, she's in there, but by holding back and establishing the character of her parents, you get an idea of what she's dealing with, and you get the setting, and you get the silliness and the bickering and the back and forth between them, and the little concerns that they have. And that's
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
This is something that I mentioned to you that I thought would actually make a good separate podcast topic, was how Austen's novels, while each has a heroine, I don't feel as if I at this point can go back and say all of them, but I can think of several off the top of my head. Many of them start by actually talking about the patriarch of the family first. Like how in Persuasion, what is the first thing we hear about? It's about
Sir Walter Elliot.
Yeah, how he reads the book and talks about his noble lineage and his family tree, and that's his favorite pastime. And so if you kind of think about it in terms of a film, it's like we open on Sir Walter.
Or
but Sir Walter's not the point. And in this, we open on Mr. and Mrs. Bennet.
That's why we were just talking about in the Jane Austen book club, where she's trying to read this romantic book to Dean, but she starts on the first page and it's all about Sir Walter. So that's exactly your point. I mean, that's so funny. And it's true in Sense and Sensibility. We talk about the dad dying.
Right. And in Mansfield Park, isn't it the same thing?
Yes, it's Miss Maria Ward, and she gets married to who? Sir Thomas, and his wealth sets the scene.
So I'm wondering if this is like a subconscious, we talk about Austen as a feminist and as feminist literature and things like that because they feature these, quote, strong female characters of their time. But all of the books start with a male focus.
Well, Emma and Northanger Abbey are the exceptions. Because Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich.
Right.
And then no one would have supposed Catherine Morland born to be a heroine. But I would say those are 2 of the more comic books. And when we're looking at this trend, it's more than you might suppose that the focus is not on the heroine.
Yeah, I wonder, I'm sure someone with, actually, let me just throw it out to the readers. Readers, if you have a theory or an idea as to why Austen would choose, either consciously or subconsciously, to open her novels focusing on the older generation and or a male character, please feel free to write us in. And I think for a future podcast, this would be a really interesting discussion to have.
Yes, because one of her entire points is how men run the world, men run their lives, the value of the woman. The value of the woman is tied to the value of the woman is, and her position in the world is tied to the man.
Yeah. But it really struck me on this reread. I was just, because I think we just do Persuasion before this was the last Austen book that we read. Yeah, so I was just, cracked it open. First paragraph. Oh, okay. Here we are talking about Mr. Bennet again. Okay.
Yeah. And
I've never noticed that before.
I mean, it's nor did I, and it's funny. And they're even dependent on the entire first chapter is how dependent they are on Mr. Bennet visiting Mr. Bingley and deciding who's going to be in their world and who's going to be in their social circle. And he really yanks their chain, and this is something pretty important. I mean, not only Mrs. Bennet thinks it's important, but the girls are also very interested. Remember, it says in the book they attacked him with barefaced supposition, or they they tried to get it out of him with distant surmises.
Yeah, they had all these different strategies.
Yeah. And then he finally does this whole thing where he's like, what are you talking about? You can introduce him to Mrs. Long or whatever. And then, nonsense. Which is of a piece with him making fun of Mrs. Bennet, but also a little bit sporting with something that's very important to them, and a little bit unfair to like not tell them about it and then being like, you idiots, I already visited him.
Yeah.
Whatever.
You know what? If people don't read the book, if they just rely on the miniseries, I really feel like you're not doing yourself a disservice, because the miniseries is beautiful and awesome, but there's so much more depth of character in the novel.
And Austen is perfectly willing, and this is a quote from an article I read in Slate's, and I don't remember the author. It may have been Adele Waldman again, but she's perfectly willing to tell and not show.
Yes.
And so she's perfectly willing to say he was a man of quick parts, sarcasm, caprice, odd, and his wife couldn't understand his character. However, she had mean understanding, and so. But she's also established that, but she sort of like sums it up for us in this nice little bundle in a funny way to her, and her solace was visiting and news. And that sweeps us into this world where, what do? They visit and they have a lot of news. Like they talk about, and one of the things that struck me and I actually made a note about it is when they are talking in these early chapters about what happened at the ball, or whatever. And then the officers come, and the kind of things they talk about, like Lydia's like, oh, Mama, did I not tell you? My Aunt Phillips says that Captain Carter and Denny are usually seen outside Cole's library, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's not a piece of information that I would necessarily be telling you today, because we all have Netflix. So, guess
you have to remember, these people had nothing to do, especially the women. Especially the women. They have no opportunity, like Emma Thompson says, she added to the script and sensibility, she just full out says, I don't have any options like you do. Mm-hmm. What are they supposed to do all day? Mm-hmm. They don't have a governess. They don't do screens. They don't have a piano. So they just sit around and gossip.
At the end of the book, I'll just mention that it's talking about Elizabeth and Darcy comes in, and then she's embarrassed and she has to avert her eyes. So it says she goes back to work with a diligence that her work did not often command, or something.
I'm sure that Darcy is the type to walk around the house nude.
As
like a power play. Like as soon as he hits Pemberley, like the pants come off. And he just wants to be free and just be himself. And it's like, I own this place. What?
That's certainly the way Davies interpreted it, didn't he?
That was not even. Everyone blows that so far. That is purely supposed to be symbolic of a baptism. Hello.
Yes, an ablution. But
it's actually weird. He dives into that scum pond like basically fully clothed.
Yeah, in his buckskin. Hello. I mean, I don't think those pants are gonna stand that test of. Yeah.
Oh, there must have been a lot of chafing when he was walking back to the house.
Oh my God. Okay.
Okay, moving on.
To talk about, but however, that is a very real world detail, which Austen is known for, but not necessarily the physicality of that. So what happens is that for the first 4 chapters, we're just establishing the nonsense of Elizabeth's life. And then we wind up at this ball where we sort of hear about her spirit and her wit almost for the first time, because, Mr. Bennet doesn't mention it, but we see it for the first time in that she gets insulted.
From the very beginning of the book, Mr. Bennet makes very clear that he thinks his 3 younger daughters are of no use at all, and the 2 are slightly more valuable, but Lizzie's his favorite. And I think he full out tells us that.
Oh yeah, I must throw in a good word for my little Lizzie. She has a little more wit than the rest. They're all silly and ignorant like the other girls. But yeah, so we start to see her spine and her spirit. I think, almost for the first time when they're at that ball at Netherfield together. And what was so interesting for me, so I actually read the book all the way through, and then I started again from the beginning. And I was in love with Darcy at the end, as you always are. And then you go back and it's like this bracing, you walk into the freezing wind of his pride and his standoffishness.
He really does come across.
It's a jerk.
Yeah, but this is what's so great is I don't know how she does it, but she makes it clear, even to a modern reader. A lot of things that happen through this book, plot wise, could be kind of confusing to the modern reader, especially the whole Lydia Wickham thing. But even for someone who's not of that time period, it is very clear that his manners are not appropriate, and everyone agrees.
Yeah.
And you see him as a jerk, but you also can just see him as just like, he's not a one-note character even from the beginning.
No.
He's not just like that jerk. That makes sense.
He does have that. He does have that conversation with Bingley where he's like, it'll be a punishment for me. And he's a jerk. And I mean, he turns around and catches her eye and then turns back to him and says, she's tolerable, I suppose. And then that is just, no matter if you're shy or what, that's just a douchey thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, he's so hung up on his importance and everyone else's. He's so hung up really on his disinclination to
it would be embarrassing for him to talk to any of them.
Yes. And because he's, I think truly because he's shy, but also because he's being a jackass and he's getting away with this behavior. But it's funny to read the description of him when he comes into the room and the report circulates of he has $10,000 a year, or dollars, 10,000 pounds a year. And you're like, wait a minute, did he just walk in and say, I have 10,000 pounds a year? You know what really happened is that the servants were gossiping.
Oh, totally.
Like, the gossip ran around the room. And then you hear, I think it literally says the tide of his popularity was turned when he was found to be proud and to be above his company. And then not all of his great estate in Derbyshire could save him from having. So he's no longer seen through this rose-colored lens of rich guy. He's such an ass that Hertfordshire knows what's up. And they're like, being from a small town too, I think there's, just like Mrs. Bennet has, where she's like, we dine with 4 and 20 families. There's a little bit of defensiveness, even like there is today.
Oh, for sure.
For someone toffee and posh to come into this world and be above his company really would be a black mark against him.
But they walked in and everyone wanted to like all of them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because Bay was telling me the other day, we were talking about genres, and as we do, we sit around and talk about literature. And this is Bayard, everyone. Bayard, my boyfriend, not my Bay. And we were talking about this, and he says, well, there's basically, someone once said there's only 3 plots, and one of them is a stranger comes to town.
Oh.
And in Hertfordshire, they all want to like you. Like, you're not really going to blow it. It's really hard to blow it among these people because they are very welcoming, it seems like.
Yeah.
But as soon as you started talking to him, everyone was like, oh no. Oh no.
He loses all his goodwill by forsaking the forms of introduction. There even is a passage where Mr. Bennet is like, do you consider the forms of introduction, the stress laid upon them, is it nonsense or whatever? And this is what Darcy does. He forsakes the form of introduction. He forsakes the ability to make a good impression. And just because he's so above his company. And Miss Bingley, when they're at Sir William Lucas's, comes up to him and she's like, I can guess the subject of your reverie. I mean, it's pretty obvious to not only his friends, but to everybody that he's hanging around thinking these people are stupid.
Yeah. But if you asked him at this point, if you asked him at the beginning of the novel, and Bingley pretty much does, don't you think you're being kind of ridiculous and snobby? And he's like, oh no, this isn't my personal feeling. Like, this is just because of my station. Because of the Darcy family name. Like, it's not me. It's not that I have pride so much as for me, but it's of what I represent and my family and who I am within that hierarchy.
As Charlotte Lucas says, if she may so express it, he has a right to be proud.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so it's not like he's wouldn't. I don't think that Darcy believes at the beginning of this book the reason why he's so haughty and proud and all that. I don't think it's because he thinks he's the shit. It's because of everything that he drags around with him.
He's carrying Pemberley around with him.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then once you go to Pemberley and you see what sphere he stepped out of, it at least makes it a little bit more intelligible.
But also, that's one of the great things about this book is that, and we've touched on this before, I know I have, is that Lizzie and Darcy both make a lot of changes through the things they learn about themselves by interacting with each other. And they both have a huge amount of self-awareness. And this reread, actually, because we always know about Darcy's character changing for the better, but Lizzie's character changes a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot of self-awareness and discovery and things like that that goes on for her explicitly through kind of monologuing and thought-aloguing, I guess. I don't know what you would call it, interior monologuing.
Yeah.
Where she realizes
she's just
her own faults. Yeah, and she starts to rethink how she has viewed herself and people around her.
Yeah, and Austen gets away with just explicitly saying, Lizzie realized this, and she felt this, and she felt how silly she had been or whatever. Mm-hmm. Which also, like, necessarily is not the form we follow today. Like, there's a joke on Futurama, which Kevin likes to reference. If you know the show Futurama, it's a comedy like The Simpsons. But it's in one episode where somebody proclaims, I'm angry. And then another character says, you can't just have a character say how they feel. That makes me feel, irritated or something. So... But yeah, the masterfulness in which she does that. But I don't want to get too far away because I wanted to say, to your point about Darcy being aware of his pride, but also other kinds of pride and vanity. And maybe you're right about thinking like he's aware of false pride and he wants to keep himself from false pride. And is that conversation they have, which I believe is cut out of every adaptation, which is Bingley talking about how he's a fast writer, right? So he leaves out half the words and blots the rest.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up because that was one of my favorite passages. And I emailed you right away when I came across it.
Yeah, well, he calls Bingley, well, I don't think he necessarily means to call Bingley out, but this is the essence of Darcy's character, is he gets to the heart of how people are nonsensical. I mean, he can't see his own nonsense necessarily, but he sees pretension and affectation. And he's like, that's an indirect boast because the quality of doing something fast is always much prized by the possessor, no matter how careless the product of it turns out to be. It's an indirect.
Do you want me to read you? You want me to read the actual quote?
Yeah, please. Do you have it?
Because it's in our email. I just need to look it up.
Oh, okay, cool.
You can edit out all of this.
No, that's okay.
I'm trying to find the email where we were. Oh, here we go. Because this is one of the first things I sent to you because I was reading that. Okay, sorry.
Take your time.
The power of doing anything with quickness is always much prized by the possessor, and often without any attention to the imperfection of the performance.
Right, exactly.
So people who pride themselves on getting things done quickly don't really care that they're done badly.
Yeah. Oh, hold on.
So what's great about this is I was reading in bed and I read this line to Bay and he looks at me and he says, well, yeah, because you want to make sure it's done perfectly or why even bother? Because we are both, this is us to a T. He is very patient and takes his time and does everything with precision and precise and, measure twice, cut once. And I'm more of a, let me just pick a spot on the wall, put in this nail and hang this picture and get it done. So maybe it's not perfectly even or level, whatever. So in that manner, I'm definitely more of a Bingley.
Yeah. I hear you. Well, it's funny how you guys started talking about your now hold on. Here it is. Your personal situation and how Pride and Prejudice brings out the little foibles of people and makes us analyze them. If there's one thing that's been important to me about Austen, it's how she makes me aware of my own affectations and she makes me aware of my own vanity. But
definitely.
But yeah.
You're very vain, Kristen, definitely.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I try. I mean, I try. But hold on. I'm trying to find it. Yeah, okay, here. And so here is what Darcy said. I want to read what Darcy says about this. So Miss Bingley is saying, "Oh, Darcy, you write so well. You write such charming long letters." And she says, "It is a rule with me that a person who can write long letters with ease cannot write ill." And Bingley says, "That will not do for a compliment to Darcy, Caroline, because he does not write with ease. He studies too much for words of 4 syllables. Do not you, Darcy? My style of writing is very different from yours." "Oh," cried Miss Bingley, "Charles writes in the most careless way imaginable. He leaves out half his words and blots the rest. My ideas flow so rapidly that I have not time to express them, by which means my letters sometimes convey no ideas at all to my correspondents." "Your humility, Mr. Bingley," said Elizabeth, "must disarm reproof." And here we get into it. "Nothing is more deceitful," said Darcy, "than the appearance of humility. It is often only carelessness of opinion, and sometimes an indirect boast." So here we get into Darcy and his feelings about humility.
Mm-hmm.
And Bingley says, "And which of the two do you call my recent little piece of modesty?" "The indirect boast, for you are really proud of your defects in writing, because you consider them as proceeding from a rapidity of thought and carelessness of execution, which, if not estimable, you think at least highly interesting. The power of doing anything with quickness is always much prized by the possessor, and often without any attention to the imperfection of the performance. When you told Mrs. Bennet this morning that if you ever resolved on quitting Netherfield, you should be gone in 5 minutes, you meant it to be sort of a panegyric, of compliment to yourself. And yet what is there so very laudable in a precipitance which must leave very necessary business undone, and can be of no real advantage to yourself or any one else?" "Nay," cried Bingley, "this is too much, to remember at night all the foolish things that were said in the morning." I love that saying.
That is one of the best. Yeah, that is one of the best quotes from the book, and I just love that. I cannot be held accountable for the foolish things I said this morning. It's not fair. Like, that's how I live my life, right? You can't come back at me with something I said 2 hours ago. That's like forever.
And yet, upon my honor,
I think that Bingley comes across very well in the novel as well. He does. I mean, in the mini, they make him look kind of silly.
Says, "I believed what I said of myself to be true, and I believe it at this moment. At least, therefore, I did not assume the character of needless precipitance, merely to show off before the ladies." And that so Darcy is sort of trying to poke holes in everybody, thinking this is pretension, when actually Bingley's just a good guy, like you were saying. He's such a sweetheart.
And I like these discussions too, because they show that he can hold his own with Darcy and like verbally banter.
Although he does end the argument by saying, "Arguments are too much like disputes. Please defer yours until I'm out of the room," because he doesn't like this conflict.
Well, he does not like confrontation, right? Yeah, like many people, he just does not want to have any kind of confrontation. And he'd rather just leave. Yeah.
Darcy's all about it. He's like, "Bring it. Like, I will make," he's like an internet troll where he's like, "I'm going to make this point to death, and anything you say, I'm going to." And then when Bingley is like, "Well, they're talking about whether Bingley would stay or whether he would ride off or whether he could be persuaded to stay." And Bingley's like, "If Darcy was not such a great tall fellow in comparison with myself," and is basically implying that Darcy's just physically intimidating. So he physically intimidates Bingley into doing what he's on. And it actually offends Darcy, which is really funny that he think like his argument, it's implied that his wise arguments are perhaps not even enough, and it's really just that he's a scary guy and an intimidating guy, which he is, and that's something he doesn't want to think about himself, but it is definitely true.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. One other thing I wanted to say about Bingley.
We're spending a lot of time talking about Darcy's character, but I think that's because the book tells us so much about Lizzie.
Yes.
Like, we know her. Especially by the end, you know her. We've been inside her head the entire time. So what we know of Darcy, we just have to glean from these peaks.
Yes, these little peeks into his mind. And every once in a while, the narration will shift to what he's feeling. But it's such a small part of the time. And every once in a while, I find it delightful when we go into Charlotte's head, too. Because there are a couple of times we do. But there's one other thing, and we were talking about how Bingley is so great, and he really is. There's one part where Mrs. Bennet visits, and she's talking about Charlotte Lucas, and she's like, "Oh, Charlotte Lucas is so plain," and he's like, "She seems like a very pleasant young woman," right?
Mm-hmm.
So he refuses to join in the bitchiness. Whereas his sisters, on the other hand, are constantly laughing. They even laugh about their friend Jane and her vulgar relations and her uncle who lives in Cheapside.
Let me ask you a question, if I may.
Yes.
Why do you think that, and this is something that Lizzie wonders as well when they leave, why do Miss Bingley and Mrs. Hurst reach out so much to Jane? They don't want their brother marrying her at all. They basically do everything they can to keep them apart once they leave Netherfield. So why do they bother to strike up a close friendship, the pretense of a close friendship with her at all?
I think it's a couple of things. The first is I think they're bored just like everybody else.
Yeah, that's
And
what
they're
I
probably
could come up with.
bored with themselves. But the other thing is, in the tradition of Austen, nobody is an evil, sort of villain. And I think in the beginning, Caroline, rather, just actually really liked Jane and was like, "What a sweet girl! I want to hang."
Yeah, they just actually like her. But then when it becomes clear that Bingley is very attached, then it kind of turns the tide, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and it was always a little superficial. Like when Jane is sick at Netherfield and they're like laughing about her vulgar relations, and then with a
They're
renewal
so
of
sweet to her face. And
yes,
yeah,
a
talk sad.
renewal of tenderness, and then they're like, "Oh, I hate being ill," and they solace their anxiety with duets after supper, right?
Mm-hmm. I think that
And
might be what actually. So, kind of in my own head, I picture them as genuinely liking Jane and considering her their friend until she gets sick. And then when she is sick and they're the whole time at having to stay at Netherfield, and then Lizzie shows up, and it's clear that Bingley and Darcy are interested in these two other
yes,
ladies. Like, to me, that's kind of when the tide turns,
mm-hmm.
and it's not a genuine friendship anymore. Would
Yeah,
you
it's
say
like
that's accurate?
you're on my territory. I would
Yeah.
completely agree.
The green-eyed monster then appears.
Yes. And Carolyn is like, okay, I am sure she regrets ever making that friendship and sending that invitation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I was wondering that because Lizzie thinks out loud. She says that, I just don't understand why they would even, have created this friendship with you if they didn't. But I think it was genuine in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, and Jane even says too, she's like, I can safely say that every advance to intimacy began on Miss Bingley's side. And
Mm-hmm.
for her to then get cut, when she's in London is especially the sting, when her two-facedness, disingenuousness comes out.
And let us not forget that Jane is overwhelmingly considered the most beautiful
Oh yeah.
young lady in the area. And so to Miss Bingley, that would probably make her
Oh, hot shit.
the best,
Socially.
right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so like I'm gonna become friends with her. If I'm gonna pick
Yeah.
one person here to socialize with, I'm gonna pick the most attractive.
And I mean, the hypocrisy of the two Bingley sisters is really kind of always on display, even when they're, it even says like, oh, they were from a respectable family from the north of England. A circumstance was more fully impressed on their memories than the fact that their fortune had been made by trade.
That's
So
the
here
thing. Like they're such bitches. Like they're
they
being
are.
well reached too. They need to.
They are, and they're laughing about Bingley. They're laughing about Sir William. Oh, these vulgar people, and
Well,
that's
I like
they're
how we
kicking
draw
down.
that. I like how we draw that similarity with them, and then also the younger Bennet sisters. Um, they're both they're all awful, but at least Lydia and Kitty or Mary are kind of awful in a much more benign kind of way.
Yes, and they have no malice.
Yeah, Miss Bingley and Mrs. Hurst are just kind of like cruel.
Yes,
They're mean
and
girls.
unaffected. And I mean, when you contrast that with what's up with Sir William, and he was elevated to the knighthood, and it made him civil to all the world. That's an affectation too, but it's a very benign one. It shows like his heart is in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you talk about these other people who got rich, all of a sudden they're kicking down.
Mm-hmm.
So it shows that, you know, how you handle your wealth is also a marker of character.
Yeah.
And certainly with Catherine de Bourgh, I mean, that's another. You become overbearing. You take advantage of your station.
So I know this is jumping ahead, but I love when Austen describes, what is it? Like she acts almost like the magistrate of the county.
Oh yeah.
Anytime there's a disagreement, she will show up and like tell you how it's going to be resolved. And anytime she catches wind of any kind of problem in the neighborhood, in the county, she like takes off and will go solve it.
Yeah, scold them into harmony and plenty.
Yes.
Yeah. We should talk about Mr. Collins coming to town too.
Oh God. Well, I know that you had more stuff. Did we cover all the things that you wanted to talk about in terms of the country life?
Oh yeah,
this
sets the scene with these little. We didn't talk about one more thing that I love is when right after the ball, the first ball, where Bingley dances with Jane twice. Mrs. Bennet shows up at this little soiree they have at the Lucases to talk over the ball, and even though she has just been saying how plain Charlotte is, and how nobody can admire her, she goes to Charlotte's face and she's like, "What was it I heard that Mrs. Robinson said about Jane?" And she forces Charlotte to repeat that this woman had a conversation with Bingley where Bingley said, "Oh, Jane is the loveliest. There can be no two opinions on that point."
Yeah.
This is forcing Charlotte to repeat it, and Charlotte knows she's plain. I mean, obviously, and Mrs. Bennet just wants to hear this again. You know,
she's just awful. I mean, she is just awful. She's a comedic character in the book, but she's just awful.
I mean, that kind of is really not nice.
She's a comedic character. Okay, what is the character in Emma? What is her name? The sister who just goes on and on and on and will talk for forever. Who it's supposed to be very funny. What is the character?
It's Mrs. Elton.
Yeah, no. The sisters that she lives with her mother. She has to take care of
Miss Bates.
Yes, thank you. So she's supposed to be, I think, she's funny in the vein of Miss Bates, but while Miss Bates is pitiable and sympathetic, Mrs. Bennet is not, in my mind. She's just awful.
No, she does things like she's like, "I hate Mrs. Long. She's a selfish, hypocritical woman, and I have no opinion of her." And then when Mrs. Long happens to comment, "We will have her at Netherfield at last," when she's talking about Jane, Mrs. Bennet comes home and she's like, "I love Mrs. Long. Her nieces are very prettily behaved girl," you know, like, and
I just think she's an awful person.
Yeah, well, it's all about her family and what's best for her family, and when Mr. Collins comes, the revelation in her, or the revolution, I guess I should say, in she hates Mr. Collins. She can't understand the entail. She doesn't understand why it's fair or why anyone would take an estate that was entailed upon them. I mean, come on, Mrs. Bennet, you would feel very different if the estate was entailed on you. Then you would love entails, you know. But yeah, I mean, she's just so inconsistent. But then when he shows up and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm prepared to make your girls amends," and she totally gets that, she's not backward to credit what comes in the shape of a lover to any of them.
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh yeah, he's a great guy," you know. So it's this malleability of her opinion and based on what's best for her. She's very grasping.
There's kind of I guess you could say a postmodern defense of Mrs. Bennet, where yes, all she cares about is marrying off her daughters, but that's because it's necessary for their survival, and everything she's doing is to ensure that they will be taken care of. And I get that, but also she just cares about material things and this small part of their lives, you know?
Well, it all comes back to her too, because what happens if they all get thrown out into the hedgerows, you know, and starve? She's going to be responsible for providing for these 5 girls. You know, her husband's dead.
I don't even really see how, I mean, she kind of pays lip service to that, but all of her interactions are always just about, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. It's all just petty. Her focus is not on getting them married to secure their futures and make sure they're not poor, because when Mr. Bennet dies, blah, 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 they could end up in the street, and she wants everyone to be healthy and be happy. It's not even that. It's just the petty aspects of it.
You're so right, because what
Like,
she
wants to
wants,
lord it over everyone,
yes,
that
what
her
she
daughters
wants,
are married. It's not that she
yes.
wants them to be married so they'll like have lives and be healthy. It's that she just wants to be able to tell everyone.
Oh, you're so right. She wants to go to Lady Lucas and her sister Phillips and
Mm-hmm.
talk about how her daughters are married. And, you know, even when Lizzie gets married so rich, she wants to go and talk about, she visits Mrs. Bingley and talks of Mrs. Darcy. She loves to lord it over people. I mean, you even see that at the Netherfield ball, right? When she's
Mm-hmm.
talking so loudly to Lady Lucas, who's yawning at the repetition of delights where she has no option to share in them, you know.
Yeah.
And then Lady Lucas comes to her house to be like, offer her assistance after Lydia runs away. You kind of get the sense that she's coming to lord it over Mrs. Bennet.
I think there's
Right?
definitely a Mrs. Bennet, Lady Lucas, head-to-head
Frenemies. Oh my
competition.
God. Oh
Yeah, they are
my God.
frenemies.
You so said that, because I have all these notes when I was reading it through the first time, is that frenemies is such a theme here.
Oh, for
Frenemies.
sure.
And you know, Mrs. Bennet and Lady Lucas are these bitchy frenemies. You know, Carolyn and Jane, and at least on Carolyn's side, and even Charlotte Lucas and Elizabeth. I mean, they never really become frenemies, but they have a break
Once
in their.
Charlotte accepts Mr. Collins, Lizzie full on says, I don't know if I can never respect her again the same way. Yeah.
They have, it's over. And who else? Even Kitty and Lydia are sort of like frenemies.
Oh, for sure. 400%. But see, that's because they see their mother doing that. I mean, Lydia is basically a mini Mrs. Bennet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she sees that behavior from her mother. And so Lydia is constantly making Kitty feel like shit to make herself feel better.
Oh yeah, and when she gets that invitation to
go
join
to
Mrs. Forster's
Brighton.
ball, yes, or yeah, that's right, Brighton,
and his wife, and her
yes,
particular friend.
mm-hmm. Well, and the guys have more functional relationships. Darcy and Bingley do. They're fast friends, even though they're so different. But so we'd have to talk about Mr. Collins and his arrival to the world of Hertfordshire. And this happens right after we sort of, as a reader, we get this glimpse into Mr. Darcy, and things are heating up, and Mr. Darcy and Lizzie are having banter, and you're sort of getting interested in him as a person. I think as a reader, you get interested in him as a person. He's got some depth, especially when you read the exchanges that they have. But anyway, then that fun is all over, and as a reader, you're forced to put up with this nonsense, Mr. Collins, and his goofiness.
I will say this is one of the few characters where I cannot separate the actor from the character.
And don't you get so excited whenever you see David Bamber in anything? You're like,
that's Mr. Collins! He's been in a lot of stuff too. And you're like, oh my God, Mr. Collins. And people look at you like you're crazy. They either look at you like you're crazy, or they go, yes, oh my God, because they know. They get it.
Has anyone ever been more successful in being greasy and insinuating?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe Alan Rickman.
And they do some stuff with like the eating sounds with him too.
He's just like a sycophant. Like, that's the only word I can kind of. It's just so. Oh.
And then he's so. He thinks what's okay. So one of Austen's themes is being polite, considerate of others, having empathy in your everyday social interactions. And one thing he can't do is socialize or grasp what the other person is thinking or feeling or what they even mean. So when he chooses to read to the ladies, he chooses Fordyce's sermons.
Oh, I know. And he's like, what is it he says? He says something like, I often find that the people the least interested in listening to this are the ones that the art is targeted towards, or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, read the room, dude.
Yeah.
I'm not going to play here.
And then when he makes this like long speech at the Netherfield ball, when he introduces himself to Darcy, and Darcy's clearly like grossed out by him, and it's like, who is this guy? And he's like, goes back to Elizabeth. He's like, Oh yeah, went great.
Yeah.
He has no ability to understand where anybody else is coming from. He's so involved with his own importance, his own affectation.
He basically tells Lizzie, he goes, I'm gonna go talk to him. And she's like, don't do it. He goes, I'm gonna talk to him. Like, don't do it. It's like, no, it's cool. I'm in the clergy.
Yeah,
and being a member of the clergy like excuses him from all of these rules of society, which is not true.
Right. Or so he seems to think, but it's this affectation of his importance. He's a mixture of fake servility and humility, which is an affectation he thinks he has to have as a clergyman, you know.
When but really he does think he is the shit. Like he is the prideful person that thinks he is the shit.
Yeah. Yeah. He really is full of pride. And it's so true when he proposes to Lizzie. He's like, you wouldn't possibly refuse me. Financially, this is, you know, the best thing that's ever happened.
Oh my God. Okay, we need to talk about this proposal scene. Because it goes, I read it to Bayard while he was doing something around the house one evening, because it is so, I don't even know the words to describe it. It's like enraging, but hilarious, but it goes on and on.
Yeah, it really does.
Because she keeps saying no. And he keeps saying, it's so I know it's the way young ladies do it now, where they, you know, pretend to say no. And she's like, would you just listen to what I'm telling you? And it makes me so mad, because it's this perfect example of, it's, oh God, and it's like, even before this, this is why Austen is so brilliant, you guys. I'm freaking out. A woman says something and it is discounted.
Yes, she can't even be taken seriously.
Lizzie full on says, she's like, I would much rather, instead of thinking me, you know, delicate, I would rather you think me rational. Yeah. Because I'm standing here telling you I am not going to marry you. And he's just completely bulldozing her thoughts and her feelings, acting like she can't possibly be making this decision.
Well, yeah, he's like, I know what's best for you. And then he's like, your father knows what's best for you. She's like, I got to apply to my father. I love the part she's like, maybe I should apply to my father, whose behavior at least could not be mistaken for the coquetry of an elegant female.
Yes. Oh God, it's so great how he refuses to see that she is standing in front of him as a person with their own mind, capable of making a decision.
And what's so hilarious about that, Maggie, is that's exactly the way Darcy goes to Elizabeth and proposes. He thinks financially, because it's so eligible, there is no way in the world he's going to get turned down. So this is a pretension to pride that he has no deservingness of, just like Collins, which is amazing to me.
She handled it much better than I would say with Collins. I would have just like full on. Do you know what I mean? Like, she just keeps telling him again and again. I don't know how else to tell you.
And
that the answer is no.
That goes back to Elizabeth too, because she's so much smarter than everybody else around her. But she takes pity on the dumb people around her. Like, she's not gonna be harsh on them. She's gonna come down to their level and try to make them understand.
And we've talked before that she's very smart, and she'll quip and, you know, be snarky, but she never is mean, really, or cruel. I mean, maybe you could say in her response to Darcy in the proposal, but she was livid. I mean, that was very insulting.
Oh yeah.
So, but even then, when she's like, I just don't know how else to tell you this, Mr. Collins, like, she doesn't, I mean, she's not going to yell at him because this is a book of the time, but even then she doesn't cross the line to acting in, you know, incivilly, as they would say. She's still very polite, and she's just like, no, I don't know how else to tell you this.
You know,
okay, let me just say, can you imagine if Mr. Collins had proposed to Miss Bingley? Right? I mean, she would eviscerate him. Right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
She would absolutely eviscerate him, and he would be he would not even be standing. He would be crying under the table like a little child because of how she would treat him. Yeah. And Lizzie is just like, nope.
Yep. Well,
and then walks out. Like, nope, not gonna happen.
She's like, and what she says is sort of almost a reference to him and his happiness too, because she's like, I could not make you happy. And, you know, You could not make me happy, and I'm convinced I'm the last woman in the world who could make you happy.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't going to work out for either of us.
Yeah.
But and then what does he do? He goes and immediately proposes to Charlotte Lucas after getting a little sweetness.
That was so. But see, this is the thing. Charlotte knows what she's doing.
Oh yes.
As soon as he shows up and she knows that Lizzie said no, she sees her opportunity.
Yes, she does. And okay, hold on, because I made a note to myself that I wanted to read the passage where Charlotte meets him in the lane and what she had resolved to do, and being like neither handsome nor romantic or whatever. So hold on just 1 second. Here. Charlotte herself was tolerably composed. She had gained her point and had time to consider it. Her reflections were in general satisfactory. Mr. Collins, to be sure, was neither sensible nor agreeable. His society was irksome, and his attachment to her must be imaginary. But still he would be her husband. Without thinking highly either of men or of matrimony, marriage had always been her object. It was the only honorable provision for well-educated young women of small fortune, and however uncertain of giving happiness, must be their pleasantest preservative from want. This preservative she had now obtained, and at the age of 27, without ever having been handsome, she felt all the good luck of it. The least agreeable circumstance in the business was the surprise it must occasion to Elizabeth Bennet, whose friendship she valued beyond that of any other person.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's so mercenary. It is so self-interested. But then when you read right before it, what happens with Lady Lucas began directly to calculate with more interest than the matter had ever excited before how many years longer Mr. Bennet was likely to live.
Oh my God, that was hilarious.
I love this with her frenemy. She's going to get, her daughter's going to get her frenemy's house. And she's like, how long till Mr. Bennet dies?
This is why it's not just, I mean, we can, not all the blame is on, I said Mrs. Bennet is awful, and she is, but not all the blame is on her. We see enough of Lady Lucas to know that she's just invested in this.
They all are. Right? I mean, that's
their rivalry, right?
They're all looking to stay rich, to be rich and to stay rich. And even the rest of her family, it says the younger girls formed hopes of coming out a year or two sooner than they might otherwise have done. And here is the worst part. The boys were relieved from their apprehension of Charlotte's dying an old maid, because of course they feel that way because they would have to support her financially.
And also it's like embarrassing, right?
Yes.
Isn't there also where Mr. Collins is like, yo, please don't talk about this because it's pretty embarrassing. And then as soon as someone shows up, Mrs. Bennet is like, oh my God, he proposed to Lizzie and she said no. And like, she just tells everybody right away. They can't keep it quiet at all. It lasts like 10 minutes before they're just like, she's spreading it all over the place.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah. Gossip.
Yeah. It's all they do. It's terrible. Go read a book, lady.
Read a book.
She got books.
They didn't have like bodice rippers back in the day, or she would have been
Gothic novels. What are you talking about?
That's true. Yes,
they don't need a bodice if you have a monk that can walk through walls or whatever.
Yeah, with his magic branch.
Yes.
Oh man. But into Antonia's bedchamber. But what was I going to say? Oh yeah. When they ask Collins to read to them, right? They produce a novel, and he starts back because everything announced it to be from a circulating library. So even we get that little insight that even the Bennet girls are like all about the Gothic romance.
Yeah,
which I love.
That's the only reason, though. They probably just flipped the scenes with the sex scenes. Like when I was 16, I would go to the library and grab some romance books and like just sit in the library and like flip through to find the sex scenes and just read those.
I have an admission that every time I read a book that has a sexy sex scene, after I finish the book, I go back and read the sexy.
Oh yeah, totally. That's the good part.
Okay, yeah, okay. I'm glad
I mean,
we're
you
on
don't
the
have to
same
be
page.
embarrassed. That's normal behavior.
I've started to read these Miss Fisher's Mysteries, the show.
Oh, you're
Miss
reading the
Fisher's.
books?
Yeah, I'm reading the books. And as you know, in the show, she has a very active sex life, but in the books, it's like graphic.
Really?
So, yeah.
Maybe I need to read Miss Fisher's Mystery.
I'm so hooked on them. I'm so bad that I'm not even waiting to get them from the library. Every time I finish one on my Kindle, it's like, do you want to buy the sequel for $6.99?
Well,
And I'm
yes,
like,
Amazon, I do.
yes, I do.
Maybe I should. I love the show. It's very cute. But maybe I should give these books a try. Hey.
Oh, man. When the show, not to talk too much about the show, but it does have a connection to Austin, a very tenuous one, in that there's an Austin chapter in Boise. They invited me to come because they saw my Jasna registration come through. So they invited me to come to their annual picnic, but I was out of town. But they did put me on their listserv. So after the picnic, somebody apparently had been talking at this picnic about Miss Fisher's Mysteries and how much they loved them. So there was this huge discussion list going on about how amazing they were. And I remembered that you had showed me the first episode. So I went back and just devoured them all. I made Kevin sit and watch so many. And I'm sure he was like,
No, he probably liked it.
He was like, I can appreciate a good genre piece or whatever. So he was tolerant of it. But that last episode came around and I was depressed.
Okay, don't tell me. Don't spoil.
Oh, okay. I thought
Watch
you.
the whole thing.
Okay, sorry. I thought you had seen
Girl,
them.
what time do I have to watch all that? No, I had to
Maggie-
catch up on Supergirl this summer.
You showed me the first episode of Miss Fisher's Mysteries when I was still living in Virginia. So you have had a year. So
Okay, but I had to catch up on Supergirl, and I've been really busy with work and other stuff. Like, I've been so honestly, confession, I've been so stressed the past couple of weeks that I've basically only watched Great British Baking Show.
Oh, the Great British
That
Bake
is my
Off.
salve. It is my therapy. I just drink wine, actually probably too much wine. Not a healthy way to deal with stress. And watch Great British Bake Off and Great British Bake Off Masterclass.
Nice.
Because I just find it relaxing.
Well, we have gotten
relaxing.
We have gotten to the Collins proposal.
I know, but there's so much still to even talk about the beginning that we didn't.
What we miss?
I don't know. I just feel like there's so much every page.
Okay, let me break out my notes.
Every page. Oh, I want to read something. Let's see. Hopefully my Kindle didn't just die. I keep getting your battery is running low notice. I would like to read when Lizzie is first talking to Wickham, because I believe this is still within our part that we're going to talk about, because he shows up when Collins is still there. I would like to talk about how Wickham describes Darcy, because I think that it is both very unfair, but I think it is also fair. And you can see what you think, okay?
Oh, we didn't talk about Wickham at all. Oh my God.
I know. Okay, so here's what we'll say. Almost all his actions may be traced to pride, and pride had often been his best friend. It has connected him nearer with virtue than with any other feeling. But we are none of us consistent, and in his behavior to me there were stronger impulses even than pride. Can such abominable pride as his have ever done him good? Yes. It has often led him to be liberal and generous, to give his money freely, to display hospitality, to assist his tenants and relieve the poor. Family pride and filial pride, for he is very proud of what his father was, have done this, not to appear to disgrace his family, to degenerate from the popular qualities, or lose the influence of the Pemberley house is a powerful motive. He has also brotherly pride, which, with some brotherly affection, makes him a very kind and careful guardian of his sister, and you will hear him generally cried up as the most attentive and best of brothers. So I think that's really interesting, because he's going about this to diss Darcy and talk about how everything he does is informed by pride. But almost all of the things that he says there are actually very good qualities.
Yeah.
He is liberal with his funds. He helps his friends when they need financial help. He helps his tenants. He's very careful to make sure that they're all taken care of. He loves his sister. He's the best brother. He's proud of the man his father was. I mean, these are all
And
admirable
those are the
qualities.
things that when Elizabeth goes to Pemberley, those are the things she hears from Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper, and thinks, wow, maybe this guy is a good guy. So you're absolutely right. She's hearing all this stuff, and it's just wasted on her because of her prejudice against him.
And the thing is that Wickham doesn't even understand that the things that he's saying, those are good qualities. He's saying it like it's awful.
Yeah, like he's oh, he's such a jerk.
Like, oh, he does all these great things, but it's only out of pride. But I mean, that doesn't. What is it that Darcy actually says? He says pride is not always. Oh, when he's bantering with Lizzie,
where there's a real superiority of mind, pride will always be under good regulation.
Yeah, so it's not. I mean, pride is one of those words where it can have both negative and good connotations.
Yeah.
And if being proud of your family name and of wanting to live a good life and being proud that you are, you know, not the overseer, what's the word I'm looking for? Because they
like the landlord.
Yeah, you know, like he is proud to be a good landlord and so he will act this way. I don't see that as a bad thing.
No, you know what? You're right. And even today, you know, being proud of yourself is something that is encouraged. You know, you should celebrate your successes. And it does help you to move forward and to try new things. If you're like, oh, you know, I did this great thing at work or I got promoted, you know, I'm proud of myself. You know, that's not something to be discouraged. It's something to be like, yeah, you deserve to feel this pride. You know, you worked hard.
Yeah, or if you worked really hard because you wanted to get that promotion because you're proud that your family has come from a long line of people who have kind of held a similar position. And so you want, you know, if everyone in your family went to Yale and you're super proud that everyone in your family went to Yale, so you work your ass off to get into Yale. That doesn't mean the things that you did to get into Yale, assuming they were all legal, like those are good things, you know, like it can inspire us. Yeah. Having that kind of, it's not even so much, I don't know, maybe this is an older interpretation of pride and the word means something different. But rather than pride, I would say it's almost like it's motivating.
Yes.
And a legacy.
Yes.
And also fear of being the weak link, you know?
Right. Right. Well,
you don't want to be the person that brings down Pemberley.
It has these good effects. But I think one of the implications too is that he doesn't really feel liberal at his heart.
Right. It's just a pretense.
It's a pretense because he wants to keep up appearances.
And I think that's what Wickham's getting at.
Yes.
But I think that what we find out when we go to Pemberley is that the truth is that is the type of person he is. That is the type of man he is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just a pretense.
Right.
And for whatever reason, being there and hearing it from his housekeeper and also hearing how he's good-tempered and how he's, you know, she's never had a cross word from him since he was 4 years old or something like that.
And it's not just the housekeeper. They also ask around the town.
Yeah.
Or Lizzie does. And everyone she talks to in Lambden around Pemberley is like, oh yeah, he's great.
Well, they're like, you know, they had nothing to accuse.
Hang out with us.
Yeah, I think it says, yes, well, exactly. I think it says they had nothing to accuse him of but pride, and pride he probably had, or at least it would be imputed by a little town where he did not visit.
Like he was a place he was much absent from or something like that, because he's just not going to go to the Inn of Lambton to like
and be like, you know, hey, Anne, what's up? You know, like, let me have some grog at your tavern, you know, like he's not going to do that.
Also, that would probably be inappropriate just because he's kind of their employer.
Yes.
If you consider Landed entry world, everyone is basically paying him rent. So it's like it'd be kind of weird, right? For your landlord to like go down and have a drink with everyone, like just kind of awkward.
Yeah.
Just not
Plus,
appropriate.
He has these posh manners that, of course, they wouldn't have, and it would just be uncomfortable for everybody. Yeah. So yeah. Wickham, though, that scene where you're talking about where he's talking about Darcy and giving her all the straight poop on what Darcy's really like and what, you know, like all this BS. I am not the first person to point this out. And the first time I read the book, I didn't even necessarily feel this way. But when I read the book this time, it was so obvious to me that he was saying, oh, I can never defy or expose the son of the old Mr. Darcy, while that's exactly what he's doing.
Oh, yeah, but see, I did catch that. Let me tell you, I did catch that the first time. And it's another credit to Austen's ability to write, where we 100% believe that this guy comes off as very affable and charming and everyone loves him, and Lizzie just eats it up, and we don't think she's stupid because of it. It's not like, oh, you idiot. But
Yeah.
as a reader, you know right away that he's two-faced and up to no good. At least I did. Like this idea that he turns out to be a rake, to me, was, I remember when I first read this in like high school or middle school, like it was not a surprise.
That's good for you. I mean, because I got duped a little bit too, because a typical author will give you a few signals as to whether
sorry, go ahead.
As to whether a character is good or bad. And when Wickham is introduced and he says something about the possibility of it being a wet night, but Lizzie thinks the best speaker can render the most threadbare subject interesting. And so as a reader, you're like, oh, he's a cool guy. Yeah. So then when exactly Lizzie does. So then when all this stuff comes out, you're very credulous and you're like, yeah, I hate that Mr. Darcy. Let's trash talk him. And it was lost on me. I mean, I had seen the movie before I had read the book, so I knew he was a bad guy. And maybe that was why I was not quite paying so much attention. But it seemed like a natural, like, let me tell you about, I'm going to confide a secret in you. And people love being confided in and feeling like they know what's up. And that, enticed her too. So she's just prejudiced in his favor by his appearance, by his manners, by his like wittiness or whatever. And I was sucked into that.
Well, let me clarify. I did not think that, I didn't know the depth of his depravity. I didn't understand like the extent to which he's the villain of the piece, I guess, is the thing when you first meet him. It's not like if it was a murder mystery, I'd be like, oh, he's the killer.
Yeah, he's the murderer.
Sociopath. You don't think, oh, he tried to seduce Miss Bingley at 15 and then runs away with Lydia. Like, you don't expect that kind of behavior, right? But I think that she does a really good job of kind of not telegraphing, because it's not obvious. It's not in your face. But anyone who... Oh, he's just so willing to tell all this dirt.
Yeah, to spill it.
It's the two-facedness, I think, because he does say, like you specifically said, oh, well, I don't want to, he was a really good guy, I shouldn't spread it. And it's all the things that Lizzie thinks about later. Like, he said he didn't want to talk about him, but then he told everyone. And in the book, it's like multi-page storytelling. And he said it would be up for Darcy to leave if he was uncomfortable, but then he didn't go to the ball. And that's also a huge hint.
Yeah.
Like, he was too cowardly to show up.
When she reviews that in her mind, it sort of bursts upon you. It's like, yeah.
Well, I think she did a really good job of laying that groundwork. And I do remember being like, this guy's up to no good. You can just kind of tell by the way he just so is readily will speak of his misfortunes, I guess. I just don't trust people who...
Here's the other thing, too. He doesn't know anything about her. So his decision to trust her on sight is another compliment to her that she takes to herself. Yeah. She's like, this guy clearly trusts me to tell me this. And he should, because he can clearly tell I'm good people, just like I can clearly tell he's good people,
But she also realizes, just like she realized that he went after Miss King because of her inheritance, that at the time, Lizzie was actually not that bad a prospect. Right?
Yeah, right. Well, Miss King has 10,000 pounds and Lizzie has 1,000 pounds. So
yeah, and I think Lizzie thinks to herself later, though, she's like, at the time when he first met me, like anything would have been like a step up to marry a woman, even with very little fortune, to marry a woman from a respectable family for him.
Yes, and
would have been a step up.
She also says that, she has that line, well, my younger sisters don't understand that handsome young men must have something to live on as well as the poor, She's made her peace with it or whatever. And then she realizes, wait a minute, when she hears Lydia say something similar, like, oh, Wickham could never have cared about Mary King. Who could have about such a nasty freckled little thing or whatever? She's like, that was my own sentiment that I was harboring in my breast and fancied liberal. But here's the other thing, and I made a big note about this, and I'm also not the first person to make this point. But there's a massive, what Lizzie's struggling with that whole thing with Mary King and him, is there's a massive inconsistency in allowable behavior for women of her class. And she's even warned about Wickham. She's like, you could love him, Mrs. Gardner.
That was such a great scene that I wish had been in the miniseries too, because it gives you a lot of insight as to her aunt's character.
Yeah, because her
It was
aunt is
great.
like, you could love this guy, but do not pursue it because he can't support you.
Yeah.
So if it's bad, the book is saying, these people who are chasing after Darcy because he's rich or chasing after men just because they're rich or they have money, these people are not morally right. They're not morally right. This is not right in the head. What makes it so morally right to reject a guy because he doesn't have enough money when the tables are turned? But that is the whole thing that Austen is saying. She's like, okay, I can't chase a rich guy because he's rich. That would be wrong. We all acknowledge that. Why can't I get with a poor guy? Or why is it allowable for me to reject a man I love because he's poor? Why is that something that everybody praises? Why is that? It just like Anne Elliot, just like Eleanor from Sense and Sensibility. These women are trapped. On one side, they'd be censured to chase a rich man. On the other side, they'd be censured to make a match with a poorer man. So it's a big catch-22, and that's the frustration. That's what's causing one of the things causing Lizzie to be morally inconsistent on this point.
Yeah.
Sorry for the long rant.
She kind of flatters herself a bit where she thinks that, well, I don't have a lot of money, so he must have just really liked me for me.
Yeah.
And then it's like, no, I still would have been better than nothing. Kind of. I don't know. I see Wickham as kind of always having multiple side projects going at the same time.
Yeah.
Like Lizzie, not a lot of money, respectable family, good to look at, good to talk to. Let me keep her in my back burner just in case nothing better comes along.
All of his intrigues are honored with the title of seductions after he goes away.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm really glad you mentioned that because they had this long note I made about this inconsistency of behavior.
Yeah, we had to talk about Wickham. There was something I was gonna make a point, and now I'm not sure I can remember what it was. I'm sure it was about the patriarchy. Yeah, it's gone. It was something about the hypocrisy. You had touched on a little bit about how like women and men, the same behavior was frowned upon by one but acceptable for the other, and it was something about that, but I can't remember what it was now. It's not coming.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It happens.
One of the things we also didn't talk about it in depth but you mentioned it, was what he doesn't show up to the Netherfield ball. Mm-hmm. And we didn't talk about the ball, but I mean,
why don't we stop before the ball so we can cover the ball?
Okay.
Next episode.
Well, if we're going to end though when the Bingleys leave, then we have to cover the ball.
Oh, well, then we do it now. I just wanted to give it the time it deserves.
Oh, the time deserves. Well, is the ball the last thing we should talk about then?
I guess. I mean, we kind of talked about the Collins-Lizzie proposal and the aftermath of that already. So we're not really going chronologically. We're just kind of going by part.
Yes.
But I think that's okay because I feel like the ball. Oh, and another thing I was gonna say is that about how Wickham, I had hints that he was not a great guy.
Yeah.
At this point in the book, that Darcy's the romantic lead. I mean, come on.
Yes.
So you know that Wickham is not going to be in it for the long haul. So when he starts shitting all over Darcy,
you're like, wait a second.
Something has to be up because Darcy's the romantic lead. So that's another kind of, but that's more of a, if a reader is familiar with this type of story, insight.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, because at this point you do still kind of dislike Darcy, but you're right. You have gone into his head and you've read the part about how he's never been bewitched by any woman so much as he has been by her. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about the ball.
Okay, let's talk about the ball, and let's talk about when the Bingleys leave, and then that can be...
Yeah. So the ball is when we have 100% confirmation that Darcy's super interested in Lizzie because he asked her to dance.
Yes. And she accepts him before she knows what she's doing, which is sort of interesting, when you just get caught in this social situation where you're sort of like, okay, whatever. Yeah. Okay, so this is a stupid side tangent, but I get really nervous when I order food. It's like it's like a problem ingrained from early childhood where I'm afraid to talk to waiters. I'm a very strange person. It's very strange. But because of that, if they ask me a question about, oh, do you want this or do you want that? I'll answer at random because I'm like
Oh.
really nervous. And so I wind up ordering stuff I don't want all the time. So yeah, that's how she gets roped into dancing with Mr. Darcy, is because of my problem where she has like this blank mind. But anyway, she dances with him and they have a very fraught encounter, which is very sexy. The tension, that's the true Darcy Lizzie, like, these crazy kids, they're ruining everything. Where she wants to hurt him because she's enamored with Wickham and she's heard the story about Darcy being a bad guy. So she has all these little digs.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something in particular? I mean, do you want to talk about them bantering? Because I don't really have any notes on that. I think everybody knows.
No, I just think it's really wonderful to read.
Yeah, it is. It's one of the best passages where she's like, oh, we were just farming a new acquaintance in town.
Where it starts off like, and the miniseries does a great job of this, by the way, where it's just kind of super awkward because no one's saying anything.
Yes.
And she's kind of like, okay. She's like me, where she basically says everything she's thinking.
And let's acknowledge
this is an awkward silence. Like, one of us should probably say something.
Yeah, she's sort of acknowledging out loud she doesn't care to talk to him. She doesn't have anything to say to him. She doesn't want to be there. And it's sort of a way of punishing him almost for asking her to dance. So she's like, okay, I know you're a jerk. You're not going to say anything. So I'm going to poke the bear. I'm just going to poke at it for my own amusement.
Mm-hmm.
Then they get into this whole thing where she's like, oh, I'm trying to sketch your character, which is another thing. Her prejudice is blinding her from doing that, right? But the other thing is he's not really helping her to understand. He's getting poked at, but he's not responding in a way that really helps her, which is sort of interesting about him.
Do you think it's his, again, pride that prevents him from kind of, when people say things like that to him or misconstrue his character, like he doesn't really take any pains to correct them?
Yes. You're right. It is his pride. He's like, I don't have to condescend to defend myself. My actions should speak for themselves. And he does.
I mean, we know he's not going to tell the truth about Wickham because it involves his sister, and that's obviously not for public consumption. But right. I think Bingley is kind of the only person I can think of where he talks to, and Bingley says something and he'll respond, and there will be an actual, like, let me clarify what I mean by this.
Mm-hmm.
The letter writing exchange.
Yeah.
But with other people, he's just kind of like, okay.
Yeah, whatever. I don't care about you.
Yeah, I don't care either.
He does have that one comment, like Mr. Wickham has the happy ability to keep friends, whether he's equally capable of keeping them.
But he's not going to be like, you don't know the full story.
Yeah,
he's wronged my family, blah, blah. It's just like, okay.
He's just going to toss off some snotty comment and leave her to interpret it, which makes it very hard for her to be doing the character sketching. And he does leave offended, but then he has this tolerable, powerful feeling in his breast towards her, which directs all his anger towards Wickham. But he still doesn't do anything to try to rectify it. And he doesn't even get the point that she thinks he's done something to blast the prospects of Mr. Wickham, because then when he proposes and she rejects him, he's like, where is this coming from?
Yeah. And most people, if they got any kind of hint that, the whole county thinks you're an asshole, like, most people would probably be like, oh, damn, like, maybe I should try to be a little nicer.
Defend myself or whatever.
Yeah, like, but he just is not, he knows and he doesn't care.
He thinks it's beneath him. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
What do I care what peasants think of me?
Yeah, well, and he looks back and he's like, my behavior was wrong and intolerable. But
that's the big thing with the character changing, right? Is that then he is able to see by the end. That he did act in a completely inappropriate way.
Because he thinks these people are beneath him. He thinks it's beneath him to defend himself. And it's kind of weird, but it does come out of that pride. He's like, well, yeah, I'm Darcy. I live in Pemberley. Like,
yeah, but again, if you asked him, at the time, he would say, well, it's not just me being prideful. This is just the way it is. This is the rules of society because of my position.
Yes.
And I think at the end, he does realize that he was wrong and that's kind of like a smokescreen and not true.
And he is a creature of the fashionable world. He is a creature of behaviors and sophisticated people versus unsophisticated people. And when he is first looking at Elizabeth to make it clear to his friends that she's not attractive and he's not attracted to her, one of the things it says was her manners were not those of the fashionable world. So he's almost evaluating her at the beginning as to whether, does this person fit into my world? No, she doesn't. And then by the end, he's realizing he wants to fit into her world. She shows him a better way, a way of empathy, a way of dealing with, awkward social situations with grace, and the world with grace in your life, and with wit and with fun.
But the real secret is that his world isn't like that either. Look at all of the people that we know that exist in his world. Lady Catherine, who is one of the most horrible people and has the worst manners of anyone in the book. The Bingley sisters, Mr. Bingley's great, but the Bingley sisters are terrible. Yeah. So the insights that we have, he and Georgiana are kind of the only upper crust people who
you can stand.
Yeah. The people in his world are jerks. And I think he also comes to see that too.
Yeah, and Colonel Fitzwilliam, but the thing
he's a second brother, a second son. He is not the head of the family.
Right. The thing about Lady Catherine too that I love so much is that the people who are full of folly in Darcy's life are parallel to the people who are full of folly in Elizabeth's life, right? Mm-hmm. Elizabeth has a younger sister who runs away. Well, Darcy's younger sister almost got seduced and running away with the same man. And then Mrs. Bennet has terrible manners and is vulgar and annoying. Well, guess what? Lady Catherine de Bourgh has terrible manners and is vulgar and annoying. So there's sort of like parallel casts of people in both of these people's lives, but he can't see the folly of these people. He's blind to it because part of
that's a really good insight, Kristen. I didn't even think of that. That's a really, really good insight. And so when he throws it into her face, she doesn't know those people yet, but basically the same thing could be said of them. It's just because they have money. Oh, I remember my point from earlier. My point from earlier was going to be that what we see in this novel is a lot of why people say that, in this country, we struggle with with racism and just this like skin color issue and country of origin. Whereas in the UK, a lot of people will say that they struggle more with class distinctions. And I think that is mixed up a lot in the whole racism thing. But putting that aside, even here, you can see these like such clear lines in this very hierarchical class system, and to move among these was just not done.
I once was on a vacation in Bermuda when a Scottish couple was staying at the same bed and breakfast with us. And this Scottish couple, bless their hearts, we talked about many things, but one of the things that I said at one point, they were talking about the royals and how ridiculous it is. And I was saying, well, here in America, because we have a classless society, we don't really have that royalty. So I think the reason that Americans devour tabloids about Kate and Wills is that we don't have that, right? So we're going to be obsessed with people who do have royalty. And then she said right back to me, she's like, you really do. You don't live in a classless society.
Yeah, that's true. All. I would have also said that to you, Kristen.
Yeah. Well, and I was just trying to counter the point that she was like, why are people obsessed with Kate and Wills in this country or in your country or whatever? But it was a short-sighted point in that I didn't think about that but I was just thinking in the Pride and Prejudice mold, because I'm so obsessed with Jane Austen. I'm like, yeah, well, we don't have that, like landed gentry, the plummy accent. We don't have, the accent thing as much as Britain does, mm-hmm. You have like this plummy accent versus posh voice or whatever. And people like make immediate assumptions about you based on your accent. So anyway, to your point.
Here's what I'll say. We don't have we don't have a history like the UK does of these kind of feudal and gentrified specific class areas. But here it's just as clearly divided by economics.
Yeah.
As it is there. I mean, the Kennedys, people talk about the Kennedys. Guess why? Because they were rich.
That was the example that the Scottish woman made to the Kennedys. Yeah. But yeah, this Scottish couple was also really racist.
Oh God.
so it wound up being these very weird conversations. Anyway, this has gone off the rails. but yeah, that's what they were struggling with too. I mean, everybody was like, and this thing with the knighthood, it's like the king is deciding who are the quality people, and that meant a lot. And so
they look down on the Lucases, right? Because while he's Sir Lucas and she's Lady Lucas, they're not titles that they can pass on. They were just granted because he was mayor and gave like a really nice speech to the king, and it was like a thing to like, oh, that was a great speech, let you be known as Sir Lucas, Sir William Lucas. There's nothing to pass on. It's just it's like an obsession with this heredity.
And then he becomes obsessed. Sir William becomes obsessed with St. James and wanting everybody to go to St. James's court. And so it becomes this source of pride for him that is really, nothing is different about him from before he gave the address to the king. But he's been validated by an outside. It's all about being validated by this outside power that tells you you're worth more. And he's worth more. And that's the stupidity that they're trying to break out of. And yeah, what else was I going to say? Because I just had one of these points too.
This all came across because we said we were going to talk about the ball, but I guess we don't really have a lot to talk about the ball. I do. With Darcy, Jane and Bingley are very close. Everyone knows, and her family's super embarrassing.
Yes. Okay. So the thing about the ball that I love is you just have that feeling in the pit of your stomach where a night turns, like a certain evening out, all of a sudden it goes off the rails and someone makes a racist rant in a modern day example with my Scottish couple.
Uncle Bob gets drunk and goes on this like horribly embarrassing racist rant at the dinner table, and you're just like, oh God, help me.
You're like, when can I leave? And that's exactly what happens at the Netherfield ball, and we can all relate. And Mr. Collins making this bad speech, Mary playing the piano very poorly, her mother talking at the top of her lungs about this very vulgar, in love with money.
And their dad not doing anything to intervene.
Oh, yeah. And their dad insulting Mary in front of everybody, which is also really ill-judged and makes her feel even worse. And she's like, this night has turned into a smoking rubble. And then at the very end of the night, Mrs. Bennet maneuvers it so that their carriage is the last to be ordered. So
this is so embarrassing.
It was so embarrassing where the Bingleys are stuck with the Bennets waiting for their carriage. And it's one of these, when will this night end? And the Bingley sisters are so pissed off that they have to be stuck with these horrible people. So they're like yawning and like being very obvious, like, we want you out of here. And the Bennets are just nattering on, Lydia and Mrs. Bennet. And I think we can all relate to that too. So that set piece of the ball is masterful in so many ways, but I really identify with that nonsense. And I mean, it was so bad that Darcy even, I believe, references. I can't quite remember if he references it in the letter or I'm thinking of the movie because they do the flashback, but she thinks back and she's like, yeah, I
think in his letter, it's just kind of general where he's like the impropriety that's demonstrated by I think except Jane. Jane is the only one who doesn't embarrass.
Right, her. Well, and the other thing though is that when he says that, he didn't think Jane was in love with Bingley. That was Darcy's BS, and she calls him on that being BS. However, if you really did have that conviction, which he says that he did, you would not want your friend marrying these crazy people. So even though what he did was wrong, you can sort of sympathize with the fact that he didn't want his friend to marry a mercenary woman who doesn't love him, according to Darcy, and marry these like disgraceful people who will not help him in society. And when you think back to the Netherfield ball, it's like these people are nuts.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that just kind of cracked me up, that part where they're overstaying their welcome.
Yeah.
Anyone who's had people don't have dinner parties anymore, but you know what I mean. Anytime you've had a party or had some friends over, there's always that kind of one person who will hang out because maybe they don't have anywhere to like anything else to do, or they just don't want to like go back home. And you're doing the dishes and they're standing there and you're like putting things away, and finally you just have to be like, you should go.
You have someone in mind.
No, there's like, this has been several different circumstances. I can
No.
remember. There's
It
always just like
happens.
one person. And sometimes it's me. I've definitely
Yeah.
been that person. But I will
Yeah.
tell the host, I'll be like, look, there's nothing exciting going on at home. I'm going to hang out, but tell me when to leave. And usually the way that you do is you help. That's the way to kind of make it not awkward and weird, is that you then help with the cleanup.
Yeah, that's nice to hear. Well, thank you for that tip, Margaret.
You're welcome. If you ever feel socially awkward but don't want to leave your own home, your friends, you want to hang out with your friends more, just pitch in and help.
Yeah, that's
And they'll be
it. Hey,
grateful.
I would take that help. Yeah. So that was the ball. And then the Bingleys leave. And they actually, what I think is so interesting is that Jane is super emotionally affected by the fact that they leave. More than you even.
This had shades of Sense and Sensibility to me.
It did, because she's actually.
She can't show it, right? She's so mild. She can't show what she is feeling.
Yes. Yes. So we can talk about that more last time. I think we've gotten to the point where we've covered what we wanted to cover.
Let me just give one more thought. This idea, because they use it a lot to describe her, even before the ball. Like, Jane is often described as mild, and I think that is also a word that has kind of changed in meaning. Whereas now, it is almost like a negative.
Mm-hmm.
If you say someone is like very mild in temper, meaning that they're, how a lot of people rag on Fanny Price.
Yeah.
I feel like a modern way to say that would be like, she's just so mild.
Yeah.
But that's not what it means for Jane.
No.
Well, it means that she's just kind of always cheerful and is not going to make any waves and is a good listener and will give you her, honest, kind advice.
She's
and
gentle.
It doesn't mean she has no personality,
right?
Is what I'm trying to get at.
She
She just has a very wonderful, warm, and more quiet personality, I think.
Well, it would be considered for the women of gentility at that time to be very valuable. I mean, the whole point was to have a tranquil life. You were supposed to be tranquil.
Right.
That's what everyone was going for. And I think that's why it had more of a positive, one of the reasons it had more positive connotation is she's not going to snap. She's not going to be quick to anger. She's not going to gossip. She's not.
But it doesn't mean she's boring. It doesn't mean that she doesn't have a personality. And I think it actually is really beautiful that she does always want to think well of people.
Man.
She will do verbal and emotional acrobatics when she finds out about Wickham and Darcy, when she gets all this information from Lizzie in the middle of the book. And it's kind of amazing to see how, the famous line that's in the book where, there's just enough goodness for one man between them. And I think Mr. Darcy might have all of it. And it's just like Jane is determined to make a way for them. There's been a huge misunderstanding and nobody knows what the other person thought. And I'm sure they're not both bad, or Wickham can't be bad and Darcy's not bad.
Oh my gosh.
It's very sweet how she just wants to believe in the essential goodness of people.
This is so timely too, because after Bingley leaves, Elizabeth is pissed off and she says to Jane, hey, I know what's up. I bet it was Mr. Darcy and yes, you're right. I bet it was his sisters who pulled him away. And Jane is so like, sweet. No. And then she says, I have no idea of there being so much design in the world as some people think or as some people assume. And that's targeted to Lizzie, saying, like, don't be so quick to fancy yourself intentionally wronged. Mm-hmm. And while Jane is actually incorrect in that she is being intentionally wronged by Bingley's sisters for reals, the point she's making to Lizzie is you shouldn't be so quick to take offense. And that's true about Lizzie. I mean, when Lizzie has this epiphany about Mr. Darcy and how quickly she was to assume that he was a jerk and had intentionally harmed Wickham and done all this stuff, Jane's approach to life would have saved her from that. And so Jane saying, I have no idea that there's so much design in the world as some people think is really to that. I
think that she's actually a pretty amazing person. A lot of, I think, modern readers, because the words used to describe her are things like gentle and mild. I think a lot of people tend to discount her.
Yeah. As an intelligent person.
Yeah. But it's also clear in the book that she's supposed to be like the bomb.
Yeah.
She's beautiful and kind and sweet and generous. And yes, Lizzie's the one we all like. She's a heroine and she's witty and a spitfire and stuff like that. But Jane is kind of she's the ideal.
Well, her candor and belief in the essential goodness of people saves her from the fall of, the kind of bumpy road that Elizabeth has to travel.
Yeah. She just has some really amazing qualities. Even for today, we're all so cynical.
Yeah.
And it's just like really refreshing to kind of exist in the mind and listen to the words of someone who doesn't view the world that way.
That's one of the reasons it's so nice to come back to Austen and refreshes your mind and reminds you how to be a candid person. And you do, when these people are set forth before you who are like people to emulate, who are like Jane or like Eleanor, you wind up wanting to be more like them. I wind up wanting to be having those qualities and having better qualities. Personally.
Yeah. So I'm kind of because we will get into this more in our next episode where we can really dig. There's a lot of meat in the next section of the book, the kind of middle section. For this reread, I was taking a specific thought of looking for times, especially in the beginning, where Lizzie gets it wrong.
Yes.
Because we always talk about this big change that Darcy has, but I think Lizzie changes just as much.
She does.
And so that's kind of overlooked, I think, on a lot of readings and a lot of discussions of the book. And so I think it's important to remember that she is just as wrong about a lot of stuff as he is. So, I love her. Like, everyone's going to love Lizzie Bennet, always. But I'm trying to kind of grab on more to those parts where she is the one who jumps to conclusions or gets things wrong or is too prideful. And then the ways that she will change further down the road.
Let's definitely do that. That's a brilliant way to approach this. So I think we'll probably wrap up on that note, unless you object. I have one final passage to read, which is one of my favorite comic passages of this part of the book.
Do it.
Eliza Bennet, said Miss Bingley when the door was closed on her, is one of those young ladies who seek to recommend themselves to the other sex by undervaluing their own, and with many men I dare say it succeeds. But in my opinion it is a paltry device, a very mean art. Undoubtedly, replied Darcy, to whom this remark was chiefly addressed, there is meanness in all the arts which ladies sometimes condescend to employ for captivation. Whatever bears affinity to cunning is despicable. Miss Bingley was not so entirely satisfied with this reply as to continue the subject.
I love that he sees right through her all the time.
Yes, and he intrepidly replies, Miss Elizabeth Bennet, when they're talking about her eyes. It's like he intrepidly sort of pokes her and says, maybe I'm not so into you, girl. So,
maybe one of the reasons why Darcy is grumpy all the time when they're in Hertfordshire is because he has to hang out with two women, these three people who are awful, right? Miss Bingley, Mr. Hurst, and Mrs. Hurst. And he loves Bingley, like his friend.
Yeah.
But to hang out with him, he's got to spend every day with these people. And she's constantly throwing herself at him and being horrible.
Yes.
And that just must get really grating.
Oh, just like that line.
He's so grumpy.
I declare there is nothing like reading. There is nothing so pleasurable as a book or whatever that they took on and they put on that stupid Bank of England banknote in the UK. It's the stupidest quote to ever grace a banknote. Why would they do that? Because Miss Bingley speaks it affectedly because she sees Darcy is reading. Everything that comes out of her mouth is just affectation to get Darcy's attention.
Oh, did you catch, by the way, remember when we were discussing the movie for the Jane Austen book club and the quote that they put at the very beginning? What is it? Incivility is the very essence of love or something like that. Did you catch where that appeared in the book?
Yeah, doesn't Lizzie say it to Mrs. Gardiner about Bingley?
Yes.
Yeah.
When she's warning her, like, don't fall in love with him, Lizzie, blah, blah, blah. And she was the context is that your behavior actually changes when you fall in love because you then become so wrapped up in just this one person and the fact that you're in love with him, you neglect everything else in your life. That's what she's talking about when she says incivility is the very essence of love.
Yes, it's just like Marianne and Willoughby.
Yeah,
Where
but it
they
doesn't
only
make any sense out of that context. You're like, what does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's very true. And what does it have to do with the Jane Austen book club story? I don't know.
I don't know either. But I think it's also another example of how I don't think that's true. That's not
Yeah.
healthy love,
Yeah.
as we know. And so I think that's another example. And I don't know if I can't remember if she's saying it kind of like in a off the cuff or like plithy manner, or
Yeah,
if she
she's sort of
means it. But
joking.
I think we all know that's not actually what love that it has depth should be like.
Yeah, it was just sort of joking. She's like, clearly his intention was engrossed by Jane. I think that's what she means. But yeah.
Okay, so we will pick up again Pride and Prejudice with the post Bingley departure story. So the Bingley has left the building along with everyone else, and Jane is very, very sad, and Lizzie's very, very mad, and Mrs. Bennet will not be consoled. And that's where we will pick up our story.
Alrighty.
But
well,
now,
would you like to travel down the lane?
I would love to travel down the lane to the Wheatsheaf.
To the Wheatsheaf. And I want to go through.
Kristen, this box is simply stuffed.
It is. We've heard from a lot of people, and we really appreciate it as always. And I don't want to forget anyone, so I have both the Facebook and the email up, and I'm trying to go through everything. So in reverse chronological order, Eleanor has contacted us. It's great to hear from her. She actually did her dissertation on Clueless. As an adaptation,
that is the best dissertation ever,
which is amazing. She also mentioned she has a tattoo of an Austen quote, which is a good obstinate, headstrong girl, which I also love. And I was I went to a Shakespeare play last night, and my friend showed up with a necklace that said obstinate, headstrong girl.
I want that. I want it.
Which made me think of Eleanor again. But thanks for contacting us, and yeah.
I just want to say that, I mean, I've mentioned this to Kristen, but we haven't entirely talked about it, so she might like stab me later. But Eleanor, I think it would be great if in the future episode when we get into like our more recent adaptations, if we talk about Clueless, if you'd want to come on and kind of share some thoughts with us, I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah, in the future when we enter our Clueless phase.
I mean, we're like that every day, Kristen. Boom.
And so we also heard from Yuziani, who contacted us from the Outback, Australia. I love hearing from people in the Outback. Watch out for those funnel web spiders, y'all.
Yeah, basically everything in Australia will try to kill you.
Yeah, no,
I hope that none of our listeners are in any danger, because the more I hear about the wildlife of Australia, the more convinced I become that you just step out your door and something will try to poison you.
Well, they don't have funnel web spiders in Victoria, which I learned from the show Miss Fisher's Mysteries. Yeah, but so just be careful out there, kids. The kangaroos, they will like kick you to death. Like, I'm terrified of Australia. I don't think I can go there because I've heard so many scary stories. But now back to Yuziani. Yes, her favorite book is Persuasion. And I've started to ask people what their favorite books are. And she also mentioned she loves the Terry Pratchett Discworld novels.
Oh, holla!
I just started reading those too. They're amazing.
They're so fantasy tangent. I need like a little soundtrack piece for when I go into one of my fantasy tangents. I'm a huge Neil Gaiman fan, and so my favorite Terry Pratchett book is actually Good Omens, which he wrote with Neil Gaiman. I've read several of the Discworld. It's a little too whimsy and ridiculous, and I mean that in a kind way, for me. But oh god, when he passed away recently, it was so sad. And I'm really glad you're reading Discworld, Kristen. I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, I am enjoying it. I did take a break from Miss Fisher, but I do want to go back.
Taking a break from Miss Fisher's sex mysteries.
That's what they really should be called. They are Miss Fisher's sex mysteries. That's exactly what they are. After we put this podcast out, I bet they have a bump in their viewership on Netflix.
For some reason, everyone in the Toronto area is watching Miss Fisher's Mystery.
Yes. That was me clapping. I don't know if that came across on the mic, but I probably shouldn't do that.
That's okay. They probably also heard Bayard pour me another glass of wine and clink glasses with me, so I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah. And yes, and so, yeah, so she had some interesting comments on Mansfield Park, and she did say Fanny changes for her on each reading, which I can totally relate to. And she's making this point, which I completely agree with. It's as if Austen is saying, okay, fellas, if you believe a woman should be all this, let's see how you'd actually treat her. And so it was interesting to see how frustrated the male characters get when they couldn't convince her to go against her own judgment, and all the while praising her for that same unfailing judgment.
That's very insightful.
Yes. Yes, yes.
Our readers are so brilliant. I hope that one day someone will look back at my life and be like, wow, on each reading, I really interpret Maggie's character differently.
Sometimes she seems really crazy, and other times she just seems
like
sort of crazy.
Kind of crazy. And by the villain or the hero, I don't know.
We heard from Lou again, which I don't think I mentioned this, that she reminded us that Greg Wise, who plays Willoughby in the movie of Sense and Sensibility, the Emma Thompson movie, is married to Emma Thompson. And
That's right. I was wrong. They didn't just go out; they got married. Which
they have kids.
Go, girl.
And yeah, and Lou
he's also aged very well, by the way.
Lou says they're her goal couple or couple goals or whatever.
Oh man, if I could be half as awesome as Emma Thompson ever in my life.
Yeah, I know, right? Just even having written the script for that Sense and Sensibility.
She is just so, you can tell. Here's the thing with a lot of the actors who are really, really good, like her, you can tell that they're really smart.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes that kind of intelligence and empathy to be able to portray other people.
And to understand people.
Yeah. We heard from Alicia, again, our first fan, who said that she enjoyed our Sense and Sensibility episode and has been listening to it more than once, which is, I'm so flattered, and just thank you so much, Alicia. I'm so glad you're enjoying this. We aim to please, and hope you enjoy this one too. And we heard from Annika, who wrote to say, oh yeah, she was talking about fanfic, and she was like, how about making a podcast about some of the best fanfics? And I'm sort of still on the fence about the fanfics and the web series, but I would be open.
We're definitely talking about the Lizzie Bennet Diaries.
Okay. All right.
That's happening, Kristen. I know you're not a big fan of those kind of modern takes or fanfic, and I haven't really read any fanfic per se, that just exists on the internet, but we are talking about the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, and you are going to watch it.
Okay.
Oh my God, here's what we're going to do. When you come into town for our friend's wedding next month, you and I are going to watch some of the Lizzie Bennet Diaries together.
Oh, great. All right. I'll put a bottle of wine in my suitcase.
I would not be opposed to doing a podcast about fanfic. I think that's a really good idea and really interesting. I haven't read any, because I mentioned this on the Facebook page. We were talking about, I was rewatching Death Comes to Pemberley, and we were talking about, do you, listeners, do you like reading kind of not canon fan written novels? And fanfic is, I guess, more like short form, or just unpublished. So I haven't really read any, but I wouldn't object to reading it. I just generally stay away from it.
I think this request actually probably encompass the Jane Austen fanfic community, where the people are published in full length books.
Well, I don't mean to say unpublished. Because I have read. It just, fanfic to me just kind of implies internet.
Oh yeah, well that's the way it got started.
Because we have one of our listeners has published an excellent book.
Oh yeah,
that takes place in the world of Austen, and there are many published works, novel length, that take place in the world of Austen, or are sequels or things like that. But when I hear fanfic, I mostly just kind of think internet.
That's how it started out, man. I was all over those Republic of Pemberley boards back in the. We have to talk about Among the Janeites too, because this comes up in Among the Janeites. But back in the day, Pemberley.com, the Republic of Pemberley, there are these boards where people would post this sometimes really good fanfic, and sometimes it was just Darcy and Elizabeth getting it on, which I was so there for back
I'll
in
read
the
that. Can we include that in the discussion? So I have to do research.
Yeah.
I think that the key to doing a quote, hang on. The key to doing a quote fanfic episode would be clearly defining what we mean by it, and then limiting the discussion to that kind of that, you know.
Yes, because there is a huge world of Austen-related publishing. It's like its own thing. There are hundreds and hundreds of novels, so we'll have to be
a separate genre.
It is. We got a lot of good. By the way, check the Facebook page if you're interested, because we on that post in the comments we got a lot of good recommendations from Tammy. So check that out. And also, Annika did also mention that if you are interested in more Persuasion, and you just have to watch more Persuasion, there is a 1971 adaptation on YouTube.
Oh.
Annika says, the acting is middling. The interior shots are very obviously on a soundstage. The hair is very big and not very period. And the clothing is very theater. But, sometimes you just need more Persuasion in your life.
I think that's the power of the stories that we're telling, even when you've got really crappy effects and the acting's not great, like the stories are still so compelling.
And I did mention, I was like, we were talking about, I think, Regency dress and manners, and I was like, yeah, it was so interesting to learn. I feel like such a rube saying this now. I was like, didn't they have some kind of language with the fan where you can put a fan in a certain way?
Oh, yes.
And she wrote back, she's like, that was not real. That's a made-up thing. A manufacturer of fans distributed that.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wait, is that just in British culture that she's referring to? Because I'm pretty sure before, like back in, Versailles days, like that was a thing.
I think I don't know.
I don't know. Apparently I know nothing. Apparently it's all a lie. It's all corporate consumerism. Even then, it's just all a lie. It's just made up by somebody wanting to sell fans.
Okay, so I think that's all I have.
Bullshit.
Yeah. Well, what else is new? If I missed you, I'm sorry, but I think that's all I have for this episode's Wheat Sheaf.
Thank you to everyone who wrote in. We really do love hearing from you.
Yes, thank you for writing in. And I think we're good to go. Another episode on the books.
Okay, do we have any we covered our correspondence. I'm trying to think. We used to do like the old business, new business thing, but I can't really think of anything. Well, except just sorry, go ahead.
Well, would you like to add some personal news about a new certain roommate you now have?
Oh, yeah, Baird moved in. Yay!
Yay!
So that's really great. He moved in last week, and my place is covered with boxes, and I thought I would care, but I really don't, because I'm just really happy he's here. And he's really spruced the place up. He's so handy.
Oh, good.
So that's exciting news. I guess, I was going to say something. And I guess this would be new business, is that next month, yes, you heard me mention it earlier, but the rumors are real. Kristen and Maggie will be reunited in person.
In the DC area. So
we will definitely be recording an episode when we are together. Yes, Kristen?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll make her watch the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. And maybe we can get Kevin to guest star again, because he'll be here too.
He says he's never doing it again.
No, really?
Yeah.
Why?
He feels like he's intruding on a part of my life that's special.
I mean, we asked them to do it.
Yeah, we did.
And I thought it was funny. They got fan mail, which I thought was adorable.
I think they had fun. So
it was kind of interesting. You guys, okay, I'll just tell you, because Bay's in the other room and you probably can't hear me. If you listen to the unedited version, it was kind of hilariously painful, because it's like two quiet guys forced to interact and talk over like there's a lot of dead air, is what I'm saying. They're both kind of unassuming. It was very funny, but they're delightful. I thought it was funny.
Don't you just love them? I love them.
Don't you just love them? I mean, let's not forget who the stars of this thing are, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate that they got fan mail, but guys, come on. you know who's the real
the main attraction.
Main attraction.
All right.
Okay, I think that's it.
I think that's it. All right. See you next time, guys.
All right, we'll see you next time for Pride and Prejudice Part 2.
Part 2.
Part 2.
All right.